Some patterns are only visible from the outside. When you're inside a relationship, inside the daily rhythm of it, the messages and the calls and the genuine worry for another person, you can't see the shape of things. You're too close. The detail fills your vision, and the pattern disappears. It took a data analyst in Newcastle with a laptop and a quiet Sunday afternoon to show Gerard Galloway what 4 years of his life had looked like from the outside. She put it on a graph. The graph was not kind. This is what it looks like when chaos keeps a schedule, and love becomes the reason you stop checking the calendar. My daughter Sophie is 31, and she works for a logistics firm in Newcastle, doing something with data that I have always understood in general terms, and not at all in specific ones. She is precise in the way her mother was precise, which is one of the qualities I have always valued in her, and which I value now more than I ever have, even though the precision was the thing that ended 4 years of something I had believed in with my whole chest. She came to my flat on a Sunday in March. She had rung the week before to say she wanted to come over and talk about something, and her voice had the quality it has when she has been thinking about how to raise a thing for longer than the thing itself has taken to develop. I said, of course. Come Sunday, I'll make lunch. She said she'd bring something. I said, don't worry about it, I'll make lunch. She arrived at 12:30 with a foil-covered dish from a deli near her flat, and a laptop bag, and the expression of a woman who has rehearsed what she's about to say, and is hoping it comes out in the right order. We ate first. She asked about my knee, which had been giving me trouble. I asked about her work. We talked about her brother Daniel, who was 28 and had recently taken a job in Edinburgh, and who she saw more than I did, and kept me updated on, in the way that siblings do, when one of them is closer to the parent. It was an ordinary Sunday lunch, and we both knew what was coming, and neither of us pushed toward it faster than the other wanted to go. After I cleared the dishes, she opened the laptop. She said, Dad, I need to show you something. Before I show you, I want to say that I'm not trying to embarrass you or tell you what to do. I just need you to see what I've been seeing, and then whatever you decide is your decision. I said, show me. She turned the laptop so I could see the screen. There was a graph. Clean, simple, the kind of thing she probably put together in 20 minutes, but which represented, I understood as I looked at it, several weeks of her worrying about me in private, before she decided to do this rather than nothing. The horizontal axis was dates, 4 years of dates, broken into months. The vertical axis was transfers, in pounds sterling. Each bar represented a transfer I had made to Jenalyn Soriano's Gcash account over the course of 4 years and 2 months. The bars were clustered, not evenly distributed. They were concentrated in a specific window of each month. Sophie had drawn a vertical dotted line at the 28th of each month. 28 of 31 transfers fell between the 28th and the 2nd of the following month. The 3 exceptions were the 27th of February 2021, the 3rd of November 2022, and the 25th of December 2023, which was Christmas. My pension clears on the 28th. I sat with the laptop in front of me for a while without speaking. Sophie sat across the table and waited. She was giving me the time to get there myself, which is something her mother used to do. Give you the time to arrive at the thing, rather than delivering you to it. I said, the appendix. She said twice. Month end, both times, 14 months apart. I said, her father's motorcycle. She said, 3 separate accidents, all month end. I said, the typhoon. She said, the roof leaked on a 29th. The repairs were needed urgently on a 30th. I said, real typhoons don't check the calendar. She said, no, Dad, they don't. I sat there in my kitchen with the graph on the screen, and I thought about 4 years of Jenalyn's voice on the phone, telling me about her father's hospital bills, and her sister's surgery, and the landlord who wouldn't wait, and the roof that had to be fixed before the next rain came. And I thought about the specific quality of worry that had been my companion for 4 years every time something terrible happened to this woman's family, and I thought about how that worry had felt like love, because it had felt like something real and substantial that I was carrying for another person. It had been real. The worry had been real. The love had been real. The calendar had been someone else's, run on a schedule that had nothing to do with catastrophe and everything to do with my bank account refreshing on the 28th of every month. Let me go back to the beginning. I need to go back to the beginning. I drove trains for British Rail for 36 years. The Newcastle to Edinburgh line, the Newcastle to Liverpool line, the longer runs down to London when they needed cover. There is a satisfaction to train driving that most people don't think about, which is the satisfaction of precision. The schedule is the schedule, and your job is to meet it, and the meeting of it has a daily completeness that I found suited my temperament from the first week I qualified to the last day I worked. I retired at 63, on a medical advisory. Not the heart, just the knees. They'd been bad since my 50s, and the long hours sitting in a cab with limited movement had done what sitting does to joints that aren't maintained. The pension was decent. The redundancy on top of it was reasonable. I bought my flat in Gateshead outright when my ex-wife Karen and I sold the family home after the divorce, which had been in 2016, which meant I was living mortgage-free on a pension that comfortably covered my needs. I am describing my financial situation clearly because it is relevant to the story and because I want to be honest about the fact that I was not a man with unlimited resources who didn't notice what was leaving. I noticed. I authorized each transfer individually, and I knew the amounts. What I did not do was look at the transfers as a pattern, rather than as individual responses to individual events. And the difference between those two things is the difference between caring and auditing, and I had been in the caring posture for 4 years without switching to the auditing one. My son Daniel would say that's not a character flaw, it's a human response. Sophie would say a human response and a smart response are not always the same thing. They are both right. I met Jenalyn in January 2020, an online language exchange forum, of all things. I had taken up Spanish in retirement, the kind of project a man takes up when the structure of work is gone, and he's looking for something to fill the mornings with purpose. And on this forum, you were paired with people who wanted to learn your language while you practiced theirs. Jenalyn didn't speak Spanish, and she wasn't interested in learning it. She was interested in improving her English for a hospitality management course she was enrolled in at a college in Cagayan de Oro, and she had ended up on the forum through a recommendation from a classmate, and we were paired because the algorithm decided we were a good match, and the algorithm was right about that, in ways that went beyond what it was programmed to assess. She was 25 then. She grew up in CDO, as she called it, in a family that had the specific circumstances that a lot of families in that city had. A father who drove a motorcycle taxi, a mother who worked irregular shifts cleaning offices, a younger sister Maravik who was still in school, a household that got through each month on what it got through each month on, and didn't have room for the unexpected. She described all of this without asking for anything, early on, as context rather than appeal, and I received it as context rather than appeal, because that's how it was offered, and because I was not, in January 2020, thinking about what any of it might cost me. We talked for months before it became anything other than language exchange. She helped me with vocabulary, and I helped her with idiom, and somewhere in the middle of that regular contact, a friendship formed that had a quality of genuine mutual interest that I recognized as different from the functional exchange we'd started with. She asked about train driving. She was interested in the mechanics of it, the signals, the way a schedule worked, the specific knowledge required to manage a late departure without losing the whole chain of connections behind it. I found myself explaining things I hadn't talked about in years, and discovering that talking about them made me miss the work less and appreciate it more. She told me her father had had an accident in March 2020, a collision near the port area, another vehicle, her father's motorcycle. Nobody killed, but her father had a broken collarbone and a fractured wrist and couldn't work for 6 weeks. The hospital costs, she said, were more than the family had. She said it the way she said most things about her circumstances, factually, without performing distress. I sent her £200. I want to be precise about this first transfer because it's the beginning of the line on Sophie's graph. I sent it without extended deliberation. It seemed like the clear thing to do. I had a pension. She had an injured father with hospital bills, and the amount was not significant to me, in a way that made deliberation feel appropriate. I sent it, and she thanked me, and the conversation moved on. Looking at Sophie's graph 3 years later, I can see the March 2020 transfer clearly. It falls on the 29th. The accident, she had told me, happened on the 26th. 3 days after the accident, 3 days after my pension had cleared, the bills had come due. I want to note, and I'm doing this in the spirit of complete honesty, that this sequence, accident, 3-day gap, request, is entirely plausible as a genuine timeline. Hospitals do issue bills a few days after admission. A family without reserves would feel the pressure to find money quickly. I am not saying March 2020 was necessarily part of a pattern rather than a genuine event. What I am saying is that when I look at it now, in the context of what Sophie showed me, the timing sits differently. I visited the Philippines for the first time in October 2020, a 10-day trip to CDO, which I had been planning since the lockdowns lifted enough to make it possible. I want to describe what it was like meeting Jenalyn in person after 9 months of video calls, because the in-person reality is important to the story and to how the next 4 years went. She was smaller than she looked on a phone screen and more animated. Her English, which had been careful and slightly formal in our early conversations, had become easy and warm by October, and she greeted me at the airport with a genuine hug and the specific ease of someone who has spent 9 months building a real version of you in her head and has found, on meeting, that you are roughly consistent with it. I felt the same way about her. She was what I had expected, and also more. She had a quality of attentiveness that the phone screen had conveyed, but that was fuller in person, the way music is fuller in a room than through a speaker. We spent 10 days exploring CDO and its surrounding area. She showed me the river, the whitewater rafting that the city was apparently known for, and that I watched other people do from a sensible distance on the bank. She showed me her family's house, a concrete structure in a residential neighborhood that was clean and modest, and had the unmistakable quality of a home that is maintained carefully by people who don't have the means to replace things, and therefore take care of them. Her parents were welcoming in the warm, food-centered way that I had been told to expect, and that was nevertheless more affecting in person than in description. Her father showed me his motorcycle, which I examined with genuine interest because I knew engines, and we managed a 20-minute conversation through Jenalyn's translation that was entirely about mechanical maintenance and was, I think, the most genuine conversation I had with a family member of a partner in my adult life. I came home to Newcastle feeling something I hadn't felt in years, which was optimistic about my own future, in a personal sense rather than just a practical one. Karen and I had separated without drama in 2016 after the children were grown, and the 6 years since had been fine, not unhappy, not empty, just the life of a man who had organized himself well enough that he didn't feel the absence of partnership as acutely as some men do. After CEDO, I felt the absence. Feeling the absence was actually an improvement, because it meant there was something to want. The second visit was in June 2021. The third was in November 2022. Between those visits and in the years that followed, we maintained the daily contact that had been the texture of our relationship from the beginning. Messages in the morning, a voice call in the evening, the shared ordinary update that is what a relationship between two people on opposite sides of the world actually consists of in the long spaces between visits. The emergencies occurred in the spaces between visits. I want to list them, not all 31, but enough of them to give the shape of the 4 years, because the shape is what Sophie's graph was showing me, and I want you to see what I should have seen. Her father's motorcycle accident in March 2020, which I've described. The roof damage from Typhoon Rolly in November 2020. She told me the roof had started leaking badly, and the landlord was threatening to keep the deposit if they didn't fix it themselves. I sent £300 on the 29th of November. Her sister Marivik's appendectomy in February 2021, emergency surgery, the bills were substantial. I sent £400 on the 1st of March. Her father's second motorcycle accident in August 2021. A fall on a wet road, less serious than the first, but still medical costs. I sent £250 on the 30th of August. her mother's hospitalization for hypertension in January 2022, her landlord raising the rent suddenly in April 2022, Maravic's appendectomy again in April 2023, 14 months after the first one, which I registered with a brief internal note and then smoothed over with the thought that complications after appendix surgery could recur, which I later looked up and confirmed was medically possible in rare cases, which was sufficient for me to file it away and move on. Her father's third motorcycle accident in September 2023, 31 events over 4 years, 28 of them in the pension window. The total I had transferred over those 4 years, according to Sophie's graph and my own bank records, was £52,000. Not all of it was emergency related. There were birthday transfers and Christmas, and a contribution I'd made to a cousin's wedding celebration because Jenalyn had asked, and I'd been in the generous mood that the October 2020 visit had put me in permanently for the following 18 months. But the bulk of it was emergencies. The motorcycle accidents and the surgeries, and the roofs and the landlords, all demanding resolution in the 48 to 72 hours after my pension hit my account. Sophie had not shown me the graph to end the relationship. She had shown me the graph because she needed me to see it, and she loved me enough to show me a thing I might not forgive her for showing me, because the alternative was watching me transfer another year of pension money to an account in CDO in monthly rhythm with my bank. She said, when she closed the laptop, "I'm not telling you what to think about her as a person. I'm just, Dad, this isn't random. Chaos is random. This isn't chaos." I said, "No, it isn't." She said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to fly out." She said, "Dad," I said, "I'm not going to end it on a graph. I'm going to go there and ask her directly." She looked at me for a moment with the expression she has when she disagrees with a decision and is choosing to respect it anyway. She said, "Okay." "When?" I said, "Next month." She said, "I'll drive you to the airport." I booked the flight that evening. I didn't tell Jenalyn I was coming. I want to be clear about that. I booked the flight without telling her, because I needed to arrive without having given her the time to prepare for my arrival, which is a calculation I am not proud of, and which I made deliberately. A man who has loved someone for 4 years and then books a flight in secret to verify a graph is a man who has already drawn a conclusion and is going to check it rather than explore it. I knew that. I went anyway. I arrived in CDO on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I took a taxi from the airport to the area near her family's house, and I checked into a small guest house that had a decent review online, and that was 20 minutes walk from the house. Then I sent her a message. I said, "I'm in CDO. I wanted to surprise you. Can we meet tonight?" The pause before her reply was longer than her pauses usually were. Then she said, "Oh, I can't believe it. Of course. Come to the house at 7. I walked to the house at 7. The neighborhood was the same as I remembered it from the October 2020 visit. The same concrete walls, the same evening sounds of families in adjacent homes, the same dog that seemed to occupy the corner of the street as a professional matter. Jenalyn met me at the gate. She hugged me. She was warm and she looked well, and she had made food, which her mother had helped with, and the house was the house I remembered. We ate. We talked about the flight, about Newcastle, about CDO. Her father was at dinner, his right arm bearing the evidence of the September accident in a way that was visually consistent with what a motorcycle fall could produce, which I noted and then noted that I was noting, and felt the particular discomfort of having become someone who noted things. Her mother was warm. Maravik, who was 22 now, was quieter than I remembered her and less present in the room. After dinner, Jenalyn and I sat on the small porch at the front of the house. The evening air was what it always is in CDO, warm with the particular quality of warmth that I had associated with her in my mind for 4 years. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She asked if something was wrong, because she could tell something was different. I said there was something I wanted to talk about. She said, "Tell me." I said, "My daughter looked at all the transfers I've made to you over 4 years. She put them on a graph next to my pension dates." Jenalyn was quiet. I said, 28 of the 31 emergencies happened in the 3 or 4 days after my pension cleared. The roof after the typhoon, Both of Maravic's appendectomies. All 3 of your father's accidents. She still didn't speak. I said, I'm not saying nothing happened. I'm saying the timing is, it's not random. Emergencies are random. These were regular. She looked at the street for a moment. Then she turned and looked at me directly and said, Why are you counting like that? Is that what love is to you? Dates and numbers? I want to describe what that sentence did when I heard it. I want to describe it accurately, because it is the moment the story turns on. What it did was land. It landed the way it was designed to land, as an accusation that inverted the moral weight of the situation, that made the person who had noticed the pattern the cold one, and the person who had run the pattern the wronged one. It was a clean reversal. The logic of it had a velocity that I could feel physically, the way you feel a train coming before it arrives, a displacement of air, a change in the atmosphere. And I felt, for 1 second, the familiar pull of 4 years of responding to that kind of sentence by backing down, by apologizing for the question, by saying, of course that's not what love is. I'm sorry, and then the second passed. I said, that's a good response. That's a very good response. But it doesn't answer the question. She said, What question? I said, Why does your family's chaos keep a schedule that matches my pension date? She looked at the street again. She said, Life is irregular. Bad things don't. I said, Jenalyn, I drove trains for 36 years. I know what a schedule looks like. I know what running on time means, and what it doesn't mean. And what I know is that the emergencies stopped being random a long time ago. Maybe they were never random. She didn't say anything for a while. The evening continued around us. The dog on the corner, the sound of someone's television in the next house, a jeepney moving down the street at the pace jeepneys move when nobody is in a hurry. Then she said, Arthur. I said, Gerard. She had used the wrong name. It was the first time in 4 years she had called me the wrong name, and I will not spend time on what that means because I don't need to. She heard it immediately and she said, Sorry. I'm sorry, Gerard. I don't know what you want me to say. I said, I want you to tell me if any of it was real. She said, I care about you. I said, that's not what I asked. She said, the visits were real. The calls were real. I said, I know the calls were real. I was on them. I looked at her. Were the emergencies real? All 31 of them. She was quiet, long enough that the quiet was an answer of a kind. I said, were any of them real? She said, some of them. I sat with that sentence. Some of them. Not a denial, not a confession, not an explanation. Just the word some, doing the work of both sides at once, leaving me to determine which some and which not, without any further assistance. I said, which ones? She said, I don't think that helps either of us. I said, I think it helps me. She looked at me, and I could see something in her face that I would not describe as guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. The expression of a person who is holding several things at once and knows that any one of them let out fully will make the whole situation irreversible. She said, my father did have the accident in September. That was real. He showed you. I said, yes. I saw the arm. She said, some of the others. She stopped. I said, some of the others were scheduled. She didn't confirm it, and she didn't deny it. She looked at the street, and she said, I'm sorry, Gerard. I said, which parts are you sorry for? She said, all of it. I sat on that porch for another hour, not talking much. The evening did what evenings do, and I sat in it, and I thought about 4 years of worry for this woman's family, and what the worry had felt like, and whether worry that is produced by false information is less real as an experience than worry produced by true information, and I concluded that the worry had been real, regardless of the cause. It had been genuinely felt. It had cost me sleep, and it had occupied my thoughts, and it had connected me to another person's life in a way that I had needed to be connected. The £52,000 was real too, in my account before, and not in it after. I left CDO on Thursday, 2 days early. I had booked for 10 days, and I left after 2. Jenalyn took me to the airport. We didn't speak much in the taxi. At the departure's drop-off, she got out of the taxi and she said, "I do care about you." "That's true." I said, "I believe you care about me. I think you also had a pension schedule." She said, "Those two things can both be true." I said, "I know. That's what makes it complicated." I picked up my bag. She said, "Are you coming back?" I said no. She nodded and got back in the taxi, and it drove away, and I stood outside the CDO airport with my bag and thought about the graph on Sophie's laptop and the 28th of every month and 31 emergencies and what some of them meant. I flew home through Manila. The Manila layover was 6 hours, and I spent it in a window seat at an airport cafe drinking coffee I didn't taste and writing out on a piece of paper, by hand, the things I knew for certain and the things I didn't. On the certain side, the money, the pattern, her partial admission on the porch. On the uncertain side, which emergencies were real, whether her care for me was genuine alongside the extraction, whether the 2 visits that I had paid for and traveled to and experienced as real had been real in the sense I'd experienced them. I couldn't resolve the uncertain column on an airport napkin, and I couldn't resolve it on the 10-hour flight home, and I haven't resolved it in the 7 months since I came back to Newcastle. What I have resolved is the practical side, which is simpler. The transfers have stopped. The account I had been sending to is no longer in my contacts. Her number is still in my phone, because deleting it felt like a performance, and I don't have the energy for performances at 65. She texted once, about 3 weeks after I came home, a short message that said she hoped I arrived safely and that she was sorry things ended the way they did. I read it and didn't reply and didn't delete it. Sophie came around the following Sunday. She didn't ask what had happened in CDO in detail. She sat in my kitchen and made tea and asked how I was feeling, and I said I was working it out. She said that was a reasonable place to be. She said, "For what it's worth, I think you handled it the right way. Asking her directly was the right thing." I said, "The answer didn't tell me much." Sophie said, "No, but you weren't going to get more than that, and you knew it, and you went anyway, and now you know you asked." I said that was something. She said, "It's something, yeah." Daniel rang from Edinburgh. Sophie had told him the basics, I think, though she did it kindly and without more detail than was necessary. He said, "Dad, I'm sorry. Are you okay?" I said I was. He said, "Do you want me to come down?" I said not right now. He said, "Next weekend then." I said next weekend was fine. He came down and we watched football and ate takeaway, and he didn't bring up CDO unless I brought it up, which I didn't that weekend, and the company was the right kind of company for the stage of things I was in. What I have been doing in the 7 months since is the ordinary business of re-establishing a life that had organized itself around the shape of someone else's needs, and now has to find its own shape again. The mornings are the adjustment. 4 years of checking my phone first thing for her overnight messages, and then the absence of that. I've picked the Spanish back up, which I had let slide somewhere in year 2 of the relationship, when the daily calls with Jenalyn made language exchange feel redundant. My Spanish is rusty, but the structure is still there, which is how it is with things you've genuinely learned. The knee has been better since I started the physio that the GP had been recommending for 2 years, and that I had been not prioritizing. Turns out if you attend physio consistently, it works, which is the kind of finding that makes you wonder what else you've been not prioritizing. I think about the calendar, not with the same weight as the first weeks after CDO. It's become more of an occasional visitor than a permanent resident. When I think about it now, I think about it the way I thought about signal failures on the Newcastle to Edinburgh line, which is to say, what you know about how a system works is what tells you when something in it isn't right. I drove trains for 36 years, and I knew the schedule the way you know your own house, and when something was off the schedule I knew it, because I knew the schedule. I had stopped applying that knowledge to my own life because the knowledge felt incompatible with loving someone, and it turned out loving someone and knowing how a schedule works are not incompatible at all. The graph said what it said, because the facts said what they said. Sophie didn't make the pattern. She found it. The distinction matters. I said to Sophie, a few weeks ago on one of our Sunday lunches, that the question I kept coming back to was whether I would do it differently if I could. She said, "What do you mean by differently?" I said, "Would I not have started, not have sent the first 200 pounds, not have visited CDO in October 2020? She thought about it. Then she said, "Do you regret the visits?" I said, "No." She said, "The calls?" I said, "No." She said, "Then maybe the question isn't, would you do it differently? Maybe the question is what you know now, that you didn't know then, and how you're going to carry it." I said, "You sound like a data analyst." She said, "I am a data analyst, Dad." I said, "You also sound like your mother." She smiled at that, and we had more tea, and I told her about the Spanish revision, and she told me about a project at work. And the afternoon went the way Sunday afternoons go, when you have a daughter who drives over to check on you and stays longer than she needs to, because she wants to, and not because she has to. That's not nothing. That's a significant amount of something. The 52,000 pounds is what it is. I'm not comfortable, and I'm not in difficulty. I'm a retired train driver with a paid-off flat in Gateshead and a pension that, as of the 28th of last month, stayed entirely in my own account. I noted the date when I checked. I'm noting dates now. That's something changed. Chaos is random. I know that because I know what a schedule looks like. Payroll runs on time. Mine does too, now.